Some Doctor Who fan theories should never see the light of day for all sorts of reasons. Some fans would have you believe that Rory is secretly the Doctor's evil arch-nemesis the Master, or that Missy herself is actually the dinosaur from Deep Breath, or something weird like that. I don't know the theory. But in between these bigger theories, there is one frustratingly minor theory that has been driving me insane for over a year now because of how much it reaches and tries to achieve for pretty much no reason other than being pedantic. So here's how that theory goes. At the end of the episode Rose, the Doctor invites the titular character on board the TARDIS because she saved his life and helped to defeat the Autons and the Nestine consciousness. However, Rose initially turns him down because of the commitments in her everyday life, so the Doctor leaves before returning to reveal the TARDIS can also travel in time, prompting Rose to accept the invitation. This is all fine and I like the scene for what it is. A good ending to the episode establishing the time travel capabilities of the TARDIS. But the problem is the ludicrous fan theory the whole thing spawned. You see, earlier on in the same episode, the Doctor noticed his reflection and commented on the ears, implying he had only recently regenerated. So, because Doctor Who fans are Doctor Who fans, they took it upon themselves to theorise that in this tiny little gap, the Ninth Doctor went off for his own solo travels from anywhere between a year to 100 years, before coming back all just to tell Rose he can also travel in time. And the worst part is, this theory has become common belief and is widely accepted as fact to this day. So many people subscribe to it, and for some reason it genuinely irritates me because it doesn't make any sense. It's basically a pointless theory that just puts things in boxes for no reason. Okay, so let's begin with the reason fans accept this theory so that I can blow it all to pieces. There's no denying that the Ninth Doctor has had a lot of expanded media adventures that need to be placed somewhere. He has a lot of Big Finish audios without Rose. He has loads of comics and short stories without clear placement, so it's natural to want to fill the gaps and have everything arranged neatly. Even though this is a show about time travel, so a clear timeline of everything will never be possible. I mean, there's so much Doctor Who media that conflicts with other Doctor Who media. From the entire range of Virgin New Adventures to Big Finish stories, it's impossible to have a comprehensive sequence of events. But that doesn't stop Doctor Who fans from trying, shoehorning in as many adventures as possible into the smallest gaps to allow more content to be possible. There are unrelated audios set in the middle of Dalek's master plan because Sarah Kingdom only appears during that TV story. Even though the 10th Doctor only lived for 3 years, he has had so much expanded media that it's growing out of control. He's even got an entire Big Finish trilogy set between Series 4 and the end of time, so the gaps are becoming smaller and more difficult to justify adventures within. So when an episode shows you the Ninth Doctor having appeared in loads of historic times and places, it's natural to assume Rose would have been there. But there's nothing to say he couldn't have just gone on adventures while Rose was on a resort planet or back home for a few days, like how Donna was in the spa during midnight. The Doctor and the companion aren't surgically attached. They can do things completely separately in the same way you can sit out a day with friends if you're not feeling it. I mean, the 8th Doctor left one of his companions at a rally for a few hours in order to have a whole year of adventures himself, so the 9th Doctor could have easily done the same with Rose, rather than doing that before coming back to invite her on board in the first place. According to TARDIS Wiki, there is only one adventure that takes place during the gap presented within this final scene. The Beast of Babylon sees the Doctor chasing a Starman to the planet Karkinos, where a 19 to 20ish year old Karkinian named Ali helps him to defeat the Starman, although he refuses to take her on board as a companion since he's still sore from the whole genocide thing. You know, as you do. However, Ali persuades the Doctor to return to Rose and get her to join him, which is the main reason this one adventure is justified. It's one singular story that actively acknowledges the gap, just like the fan production exhausted supplies, whereas the 12th Doctor who convinces his earlier self to go back. Both of these stories take the gap into account and use it for narrative framing, so it makes sense that he will come back for Rose afterwards, instead of going on countless adventures and suddenly thinking, oh yeah, maybe I should go back for that random girl who helped me destroy an alien threat that one time. Like, I don't know if any of you watch Doctor Who, but that happens in almost every single story. Why would Rose be any different and warrant a change of heart after so many other adventures? And even then, how would he remember exactly how he left it off to the extent he could pick up the lines so immediately and perfectly? Like I said at the beginning, Rose is written in a way that suggests the 9th Doctor is newly regenerated, something supported by Clive's website mentioning him wandering around in the 8th Doctor's outfit, but there's no real concrete evidence he had only recently regenerated. All we have to go on is him making making a throwaway comment about how his ears could have been worse. But when you really think about it, how often does the Doctor look in a mirror? When do they have the time to really look at their features? Sure, back in 2005 the scene was meant to signal a relatively recent change of face, because obviously this wasn't Paul McGann, but there's nothing actually saying it's not just the Ninth Doctor noticing a feature he hadn't really paid attention to before. How often do you find yourself looking in a mirror and realising your nose is a bit bigger than you thought, or that your eyes aren't the exact same size as each other? Unless you're very vain or very insecure, you don't tend to analyse your appearance, especially if you're a man of action like the Ninth Doctor, constantly on the go and not really fussed about what you look like. But even if you can't agree with this sentiment, the Day of the Doctor novelisation even reveals that the Ninth Doctor smashed every single mirror in the TARDIS immediately after regeneration because he couldn't bear to look at himself after seemingly killing billions of children on Gallifrey. Therefore, he refused to take on companions and travelled alone to save as many lives as possible in an attempt to redeem himself. So it's only after he's gone through years of ignoring his appearance that he starts to notice certain details. By this point, it's impossible to deny that the Ninth Doctor had adventures before Rose. Obviously, there are the photos and sketches Clive has collected, but those could easily be from Rose's future because of how time travel works. But even besides these, the eyeless implies he travelled alone after the Time War, the promise involves a recently regenerated Ninth Doctor escaping what he looks like, and then there's also the Bleeding Heart, which is officially the first appearance of the Ninth Doctor after his regeneration. There are so many stories and adventures confirmed to take place before Rose, so the idea of him having only just regenerated before battling the Autons really doesn't stand up anymore. Having loads of adventures between his regeneration and Rose also does a lot to explain his change in demeanour. You are really telling me that this is the exact same person who is fresh off killing his entire race after fighting in a horrific war? That just doesn't work. But by giving him all that time to explore his grief and gradually mellow out, it makes sense that he'd be a lot more lighthearted and willing to take on a companion now, rather than him being freshly cooked and suddenly fine with having a companion. However, there is also one more gap that can house other unplaced Ninth Doctor stories. After appearing in Rose's flat to track the Auton arm, he's absent for a while until returning to save her from Auton Mickey. It's entirely possible that in this gap, he went and had plenty of his own wacky misadventures, which is exactly what the Rose novelisation claims. Indeed, this gap in the narrative is where the majority of his stories supposedly take place, including his Big Finish box sets. Again, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that he'd just give up his pursuit of the Nestine consciousness to go gallivanting around the universe just to come back and pick things back up like nothing else had happened. I mean, you don't usually see the Doctor leaving halfway through an episode to go do other things because they're bored. But even so, it's a lot more acceptable to have him off on these adventures between his second and third encounters with Rose, rather than him cramming everything into the middle of one scene for no reason other than convenience. It's almost impossible to create a canon for a TV show all about time travel. There's no way to fit everything onto a neat timeline from beginning to end. You can say this is point A and this is point B, but everything in between will be a chaotic and inconsistent mess of alternate universes, conflicting accounts, and dates that don't add up. Doctor Who is pretty much the biggest case of this, because it never even tried to have an official canon to begin with. Sure, there's always been an emphasis on continuity, trying to keep things at least somewhat sensible and easy to follow, but Doctor Who fans seem to have developed this obnoxious obsession with putting everything into neat boxes. Everything must have some kind of placement relative to other things, otherwise fans will go insane because of continuity errors, like people complaining about books taking place after Boomtown despite Bad Wolf stating that the TARDIS trio only went to Japan during this gap. When you get things like the unit dating controversy or the Davis era dating controversy, it makes sense to try and nail down times so that everything actually makes a little bit of sense. But it's kind of taking things too far when you start to shoehorn years worth of adventures in the middle of short scenes that were never intended that way. Some theories should just never gain traction, and the Ninth Doctor going on all these adventures in between inviting Rose on board is one of the most egregious examples of this. But what do you think? Is the gap too small, or am I just being as pedantic as all the fans who support this theory? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you next time. And I'd like to give an extra special thank you to my Diamond level patrons, Daniel Shirato and Fallon Cortez, and to all my Gold level patrons, Alex Marston, Basil Disco PhD, Calvin, Franz Horn aka Line Vortex, George, Herna Verzog, and Stefan Never Miller. Thank you so much for your support.